Welcome to the Denver Gazette Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Schmedeke. Today, we are brought to you by Applewood Plumbing, Heating, and Electric. They are the proud sponsor of our podcast and the proud sponsor of the Colorado Avalanche. We're going to talk a little Avs here at the end, but first, we're going to talk about the story that never ends, and that is the Comcast-Altitude dispute. Kyle Fredrickson is with me. He had a big story the other day in the Denver Gazette about what is going on. Kyle, will this ever end?
The short answer, no, probably not. Not to, make fans feel sad who have Comcast and have been caught in this. But I sort of joke, but it's also a reality, right? We're 5 years into this.
My goodness.
And at this point, there really isn't anything new that Altitude is saying that makes fans think that, hey, this could be resolved shortly. But as my story went through, there are a lot of teams in the NBA and the NHL, especially, who are trying to figure out different ways to put their games on TV. So, I think it is a little disheartening at this point in the process that more hasn't been done to try to get games back on TV, or at least, if not Comcast, some other form to widen that distribution, because it's tough. I think for me, I've got Fubo TV and I'm able to watch Altitude all the time. But that's not a cheap service. And for folks who, just want to watch their games, the idea of paying, 70, 80, 90 bucks a month, that's a tall order. I mean, is it tough even for you to watch the games, Chris?
So I used to have Fubo, but they don't have, did they ever fix their Turner stuff?
Right. So they don't have TNT. So on
Which,
those nights, I've got to
yeah.
figure out something else. Exactly.
So that's why I've stayed with DirecTV, but DirecTV is even more than Fubo. And it's rough. It's really annoying to have to, pay a lot of money for just to watch your hometown teams and honestly watch for part of our jobs. I mean, it's part of what we have to watch their games.
And I will say, just for context, and the story goes into this as well, local fans should at least get a little bit of a boost knowing that they're not alone, right? This is a nationwide problem.
Exactly.
And it's not just the RSN chains, like Altitude, that are privately owned, by Stan Kroenke. It's the big guys, Bally Sports, Sinclair, AT&T Sportsnet. All these places are really trying to figure out how this model is going to work and how it's going to be sustainable. And just to, a bit of a history lesson, I don't want to say that Altitude and Kroenke have just sat on their hands the whole time, because they haven't. They did sue Comcast. They filed an antitrust lawsuit that went to federal court over multiple years of going back and forth, not to the point of trial, but through discovery and trying to basically have Altitude make a case that Comcast is monopolizing the market. They're not allowing Altitude to exist, as to where, Comcast is saying, hey, this is just a regular business dispute. At some point during that process, both sides settled with nothing actually coming out of it. They basically said in the statement, this doesn't do anything to resolve the carriage rights dispute. Basically, both parties just decided that they're no longer going to pursue this in court. And beyond that, it's been kind of the court of public opinion from Altitude, right? Just for the reporting background on the story, it was several weeks of sending emails and texts to folks at Altitude, trying to figure out what exactly has been going on. And there really was just sort of a lack of transparency there until finally, we got a statement that's really kind of echoed everything that they've said to this point.
It's the same statement we've had for 5 years.
Right, exactly. and I did post it in its entirety at the end of the story, so you can really see everything that Altitude has to say. But it's really parroting those same talking points, right? This is Comcast's fault. Call Comcast and let them know how upset you are. But at this point, that's not moving the needle, right? I mean, that's just, it's disingenuous, I think, to fans to feel like it's on them to solve this, right?
Yeah.
Like call your cable provider and let them know. No, Stan Kroenke needs to tell fans exactly why he hasn't done anything to this point to try to make the games more widely available beyond where it is now, like we mentioned with Fubo and DirecTV.
And it's, and I think this market is also a little different now because you have a Stanley Cup champion from 2 years ago and an NBA champion from last year. And there is a good part of Colorado who did not see regular season games.
Right, exactly. And, it's I guess when you think about it from Stan Kroenke's point of view, it feels like a business decision, right? The fact that games aren't on TV, it's not impacting ticket sales. That place is full every single night. It doesn't seem like it's impacting merchandising sales. Everyone's walking around town, in an Avs shirt, it seems like. So to me, that is what it speaks to, because if it was enough of a business impact, then the team would do something about it. I mean, Josh Kroenke has been on record saying that the team is operating Altitude to a significant loss. So that's 5 years of running your own TV station essentially and making zero money off of it. So I will say, Kroenke's done a good job of keeping a lot of people employed. There's a lot of folks at Altitude, good people that I work with pretty much every day on this beat who, it'd be horrible if those folks lost their jobs. But, as it pertains to my story, there's got to be more creative ways for these games to get on TV, right? And there's really kind of two trains of thought. Do you kind of make this a pilot program where you put a few of your games on? Or do you do really the whole thing where you're saying, all right, let's widely distribute this thing and make sure everyone can watch the majority of our games?
This is a situation where I feel like everyone is to blame. They are all at fault in this mess. But you talk to some other teams that have gone, streaming routes or own net and stuff like that. What did you kind of learn from them?
Yeah, so like I sort of mentioned before, there's different schools of thought here. With Bally Sports, when they went bankrupt, they had about, I think, almost 24 teams total between the NHL or the NFL and the NHL and the NBA, to where those deals were expiring. They had to figure out what they were going to do because, they claimed bankruptcy. Well, the leagues were able to put a deal in with those teams between the NHL and the NBA to where the games were continue to be broadcast on Bally's through the end of the season, but the teams could put up to 10 games on over-the-air TV. A lot of teams did that, especially in the NBA, the Bucks, the Hawks. But the team that I talked to was the Pelicans, mostly because they just started this pilot program. Their first game was against the Nuggets, where they put it on over-the-air TV, and they had huge success. I talked to one of their VPs of broadcasting who essentially said they went from going from, having hundreds of thousands of people watching these games to millions of people. And that's just in this 10-game little segment that they're projecting here. So you're obviously getting more eyeballs on your product when you do that. But what's the business viability of that, right? I mean, you're not making more money by giving away your product for free. So other teams have found ways to supplement that, right? The Golden Knights, they decided to put on 69 of their regular season games on over-the-air cable. Could you imagine being an Avalanche fan and being able to watch almost 70 of their regular season games for free? I mean, there'd be parades in the street, I think, to some degree, just with how excited people would get. But there's also a streaming option that goes along with that, to where you pay $70 for a season and you could stream those games as well. So, in talking with the Golden Knights president of operation, Kerry Boobles, also an Oklahoma State grad, got to plug that as a fellow OSU guy. They've had a lot of success with it, and they're seeing huge returns, and they're marketing their games, on different platforms. So they're getting their voice out there more, but still at the end of the day, that model isn't going to match the revenue that existed in the previous model, right? And that was this RSN model where cable companies charged viewers, $10 a month for access to several channels within that tier of sports programming, right? So even if you weren't watching Altitude, you still had to pay for that service. So that shows you when cable was booming, these teams didn't have to try very hard to market their product or to get it on the air, right? Like if you had like the +1 cable package, you were going to get, these games on Altitude, but that doesn't work anymore. I've cut cable a long time ago. I'm guessing you probably haven't had Comcast for a long time as well. So, when you don't have that subscriber base, these teams are missing out on essentially millions of dollars. And that's why Bally Sports, is an $8 billion of debt, billion with a B. So you can imagine, the struggle that Altitude's having with only having 2 teams and getting that distribution. Bally's can't turn a profit when they have dozens of teams with that distribution. So we'll see what happens next. I think there is some consternation from the Altitude folks on this being an idea. I talked to Conor McGregor just sort of in passing during the game, and he had some strong opinions about it. These guys do a great job, right? And like I said before, I don't think that putting the games on air means that they're out of work. It just means that Stan Kroenke has to re-envision what his RSN looks like and what the model is as a whole, because right now it's just not working, and it's unfair to fans, especially when teams and other markets, are benefiting from some creativity that Kroenke Sports just hasn't shown after 5 years of putting their fans through this.
Well, and it's also the tough part with this is Altitude's not on YouTube TV. They're not on a lot of these other. It's only Fubo and DirecTV. There was the Ivanka mess that I went through. That they just went out of business.
Right.
It's just really tough to imagine a world where you can't watch your favorite team on TV.
Yeah. And to your point with sort of, what does the streaming and the future look like? Amazon is interested in RSN rights, right? And so I can't get in Stan Kroenke's brain, but if I had to guess, he is willing to take these short-term losses, these 5-year losses of not being on TV, because it'll be worth it if he retains those rights. And then Amazon swoops in and says, hey, we're going to put on all the games, all the RSNs, we're going to do this massive deal where we become the streaming home of local sports. Then maybe Stan Kroenke cashes in. Why waste a bunch of money trying to put your games on over the air or doing some other creative streaming deal when, the losses that you would take in getting that started would have to be made up eventually too, right? I don't think you just get a subscription site off the ground without some pretty big infrastructure changes at Altitude to make that work, or partnering with a broadcaster like Scripps Sports who has that kind of reach. So I do think that looking forward and trying to figure out what's going through Stan Kroenke's head in the future, there is this idea that a big player could swoop in here and all of a sudden, get the rights for all the teams. Because if there's that one big monster, guy in town, a la Comcast with internet service, they can kind of create their own terms, right? So we'll see what happens there. I do think that's a fairly likely outcome, but it doesn't seem imminent, right? Because I think there's even some antitrust issues with Amazon trying to get into that business, right? Like they can't just monopolize that market either. There's got to be some fairness. And when you kind of have the giant power of an Amazon, it's going to be tough to get those deals worked out.
Well, we're going through this with the Rockies in town as well, as they were part of AT&T Sports. They're done. AT&T Sports Rocky Mountain is done. So they're streaming. You have to buy the package. It's Rockies.tv or it's through MLB.tv. It's pretty pricey that way too. What is the best for the fan? Like what is the best? I mean, I guess getting it on Comcast would probably be the easiest.
Yeah.
But Comcast isn't cheap either, and having DirecTV isn't cheap either. And having to buy a big package, I mean, I don't know what Fubo package you had. I had them for a while too until I realized I couldn't watch the NCAA tournament because they didn't have TNT or anything. No matter what, I feel like it's going to cost the fans just a lot of money.
Yeah, and this structure as well, where it's independently owned by Stan Kroenke, it's going to be even more expensive because of that, right? Because if they could offer a bigger product to more people, that would bring the cost down, right? Because you're basically counting on a subscription service here that Avalanche and Nuggets fans are going to pool together and be strong enough to make it a viable business opportunity. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Altitude's not going to tell us what their numbers are in terms of viewership, but it can't be that high, right? And the comparison that I'll draw there, and I didn't get to this in my story, it could honestly be a separate story, is just looking at what the New York Knicks and the New York Rangers are doing under the Dolan ownership, because they went through the same issue. The MSG networks and Altitude networks are really the only two independent RSNs left that are kind of waging this war with Comcast. Well, MSG went streaming. They're doing that. You can pay $300 a year and you can watch Rangers and Knicks and all the teams that fall under that umbrella. And it's very expensive, but at least they have that option for that diehard fan who's willing to do it, who, maybe they'll pay for Fubo, or DirecTV, but all they really want is the Avs, right? Or the Nuggets. Like, that's what's silly about this. Like the idea that you can't get them a la carte when that's really all you're looking for is maybe a viewer. It just makes it tough, and it's going to make it very expensive. So, let's say that Kroenke does come out in the next few months with a streaming service. Be ready for sticker shock. Be ready for $200, $300, $400 a year, something like that, because that's what's going to take to make it viable. And I think if there was like a very easy option to widen distribution that was a moneymaker, we would have seen it right now. But it's clear that Stan is just kind of playing this waiting game to figure out what the best option is. And the Avs aren't willing to take a risk, right? Like what the Vegas Golden Knights are doing is taking a risk. Like there's no guarantee that that's going to be an economically viable option for them in the future, but they feel like it's worth it because they're growing their fan base. They're getting more people interested in the sport. they're marketing to people in Utah, Montana, places where there's no NHL hockey, to kind of be like that team of the Mountain West. So, I applaud the Golden Knights for what they're doing, but it could be a situation where Stan Kroenke's sitting up in his tower in Ball Arena and laughing because he's a businessman, right? Before all else, he's going to make money. And if that's not a plan that's going to make him money, or maybe it's going to lose him more money than just, dealing with the Comcast blackout, then maybe he doesn't feel compelled to move. And I do think that is sad for fans, though, when your owner clearly is making business decisions ahead of what a fan wants.
Well, and I just thought of this while you were talking, that Altitude has some broadcast rights to DU hockey, DU basketball. They show Air Force hockey. They show Air Force basketball games on Altitude. Did they not? I don't know if they broadcast the state high school games. I think they just did on the radio. I don't know if they actually broadcast those on TV. I'm not 100% sure. So, they have a lot of things that is ticking off a big fan base around here.
Right. Yeah. And to your point, they could be creative in marketing a streaming service to those folks, high school sports, college sports. There's nothing like that in the state.
They do Friday night football games on Altitude.
Right, exactly. But if they wanted to really kind of grow this thing and be about the fan, they would leverage that as part of the streaming. So yeah, I think you make a very good point there that it isn't just those two. It's also Mammoth Lacrosse. Kroenke is always big and kind of plugging them in this conversation. Fair or not, I just don't think they move the needle for us.
The Rapids are there too.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, the Rapids now the Rapids with Apple TV, MLS changed there. But yeah, to your point, there's more they could do to widen their reach if they wanted to become more than just known as, Abs and Nuggets. Because, if you do turn on Altitude TV during the day, it's not a lot of programming.
No.
It's a lot of reruns. It's a lot of studio shows that are put back on the air. There are some of those niche sports, but that's also another point in all this. Like, if you're going to be paying that much for a streaming service, you better be getting quite a bit, right? I mean, I guess maybe the fan only wants to watch the pregame, postgame, and the games themselves, but get the most out of your buck, expand it into something that more people want. These are all great conversations and great ideas that I'd love to have with people at KSE, right? And I think that's what's frustrating for me as a reporter is, this story didn't come out because KSE had news to offer. It came out because we kept pressing them on this topic, and they haven't said anything in months and months, right? And I think that there should be some accountability here, that they update fans on what's happening, and that just wasn't going on. So, we'll see what happens from here. I hope that this story, if anything, keeps the conversation going, keeps the pressure on Kroenke, that the media and that fans, and in my story, players are paying attention to this, right? I mean,
Aaron Gordon's tweeting about it. I know that.
Right. Aaron Gordon going on Twitter basically saying, hey, maybe Jamal Murray's an all-star if we, put games on our local market. Let's start there, right? It was sort of a snide remark, not saying that's the reason, but there's a big problem here. There's a Nuggets awareness problem, and maybe it's due to the fact that a lot of fans here can't watch their games. So we'll see what happens, but it's, it hasn't been a good few months since Josh Kroenke stood up and said, hey, we're doing everything we can to fix this. There's no proof of that.
It's impossible to predict, and I know you really can't, but where do you see this going and ending? What do you think their best route is?
Yeah, I would think that by the beginning of next season, there is some sort of streaming or over-the-air option that's limited, right? I think that if Kroenke does this, it would be like a test run. I don't think they're the Golden Knights where they say, all right, let's do this 70 games, the people's team. I just don't think that. I think they're too business oriented. They're too they care too much about their product. But this is what's going to change it, right? What if the teams aren't as good anymore? And what if attendance starts to struggle? That, to me, would be ultimately what would move them to do something drastic, to make a deal with Comcast, even if the terms didn't make economic sense to them, because at least they're getting their product out there. I think as long as that building is full of people, nothing's really going to change. And if it does, I think it's very small. I think it's kind of a carrot for fans to say, hey, we're trying something, but Kroenke's going to play this long game to see if he holds on to these rights long enough and cashes them in with a big, subscribing partner with Amazon. That's good business. And at the end of the day, that's what Stan Kroenke is about.
Okay, let's flip to actual things on the ice real quick before we go.
Yeah,
Avs get a nice home win over the Canucks the other day. We were recording this before the Avs take on Detroit at 5 o'clock tonight. The Detroit games just don't have the same flavor anymore.
not quite, not
They're
quite.
just kind of basic hockey games now. But that was a nice win over the Canucks for the Avs.
It was. It showed a few things. It showed that they were recommitted to defensive details against one of the best offensive teams in the league. One goal given up is a combination of Georgiev being fantastic. He made like a behind the back glove save, one of his better ones of the entire year. The Avs defense was taking away shooting lanes. They weren't committing those crazy turnovers, in their own zone that were leading to goals. And they were also getting scoring outside of Nathan MacKinnon, right? And we've seen that be a little bit of a trend out of the All-Star break. Hasn't been quite as dominant. Did pick up an assist on an empty net goal right at the end to keep that home point streak, humming at now 27 games. Pretty incredible. But Ryan Johansson, 2 goals that, maybe call him lucky, sure, but they went in and he was in the right position at the right time. And that's not what we could say about Ryan Johansson, in recent months, really since this second line center experiment failed. So maybe he closes the year on the third or fourth line. Maybe that performance is a bit of a boost to his trade value if the Avs think that they can move him and get something in return. But that was sort of, a game to me where, all right, that's where you have to play that style of hockey against good teams, playoff teams, grind out wins, get depth scoring. The Avs did, everything right. We'll see if that continues. The Red Wings are a team I think that's fighting for playoff positioning. They're getting better. They aren't necessarily a basement team anymore. JT Compher is playing pretty well. I'm really intrigued to see how he fits in their system playing against the Avs. If there's a little bit of chippiness there. JT had a career year for the Avs last year as their second line center, but commanded more than what the Avs could give him on the open market. So the Avs get a few more at home here as well. It was such a tough road stretch out of the break. I'm really, intrigued to see, how they show up, being that they've been so much better in their own building. But a lot of things to like. I am curious what you think about MacKinnon. Do you think he's slumping? Do you think that this, it's hard to say that with how good he's been, but it feels like if you have these little lulls in your game, it's gonna be like, oh, is he gonna win the Hart? Because you look at what Kucherov's doing, look at McDavid surging.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see how that plays out over the next few years.
It's interesting because I was looking at ESPN's, like they're ranking players by position right now, and McKinnon's 2 in the center list, and McDavid, of course.
Sure.
But I mean, I don't know. I think I look at this as, I'm more of a basketball guy, and these slumps just happen, I think. And I think it's in hockey too. And I'd rather him be slumping now instead of late April. Or you know what I mean?
I do think it's important that the team continues to play well, right? Like that would be the biggest hit to McKinnon's.
If they start losing, then there's a
right. Because even if he continues to play well, but the Avs are dropping and are become like a wild card team, that's when I'm like, all right, maybe, we see McDavid, who has this huge surge to end the year. He's going to swoon the voters. The Avs aren't on as many national TV games, I think, a lot of times as those Canadian teams and East Coast teams. So we'll see. It was funny to me, though. It's very clear that the team is aware of like the home point streak, right? Because late in the game, less than a minute left, Rantanen gets the puck and it's like immediately he's like, oh, I got to get this to Nate, and then Nate finds Lehkonen and he puts in the empty netter. But, the team is rooting for him. I think there's this collective effort to where maybe there's some Connor McDavid fatigue. Let's get someone else winning the MVP, right? Like, Jokic winning a couple years in a row. I would think that voters at some point would kind of get sick of voting for the same guy. Maybe that helps MacKinnon, but I do think he needs to have a couple more signature nights. He's got to get back into a scoring rhythm. It feels to me it's almost like early season when he's slow to start the year. It's like slow out of the break. Like, I need a week off. He's out of his routine. But once he starts humming, we'll see that consistency come back. But it has been just a little bit quiet for Nate. We'll see if that picks up today in Detroit for a nice 5 p.m. puck drop. Love that timing for us back in Colorado.
So you were in the press box, of course, for the Canucks game, but they show, I'm sure you've seen that Jokic and his family were there.
Yeah.
There was a split screen moment on Altitude where it was Jokic and the baby or his toddler or whatever, and then Nate was on the other side. And it was during them chanting at Jokic MVP, and Nate kind of looked up. And right, so, hey, we could have 2 MVPs here. You never know.
Yeah, that was a really special moment. And I do think it's cool to see Jokic be like a dad so publicly,
Yeah,
right? Like he's a very private person. So just to see him out and about with his daughter and his wife, and it looked like there may be family and friends. They have seats right on the glass. Really cool, right? And I think the only time that these Avs and Nuggets guys really see each other is like at the Kroenke like charity gala
yeah,
that
that
they
gal they
do
have,
every
yeah.
year. And I think they had that recently. So there is like a little bit of communication between the two, but it's tough when you occupy the same building to build those relationships. But I did see that later clipped on Twitter in a really cool moment, right? To have both those guys in the same building at the same time. And I've seen Nate at Nuggets games before too. I think he took like the ceremonial first shot last season,
Yeah.
bricked it pretty hard. I think Nate would admit he's
That
not a
the free
hooper,
throw is
but
harder than people think.
yeah, for real. With all those people watching, man, I don't know if I'd even hit rim. But no, it's just it was a cool moment, and like I said, kind of that family aspect, like Jokic really is just like a normal human being, I think, and it shows when he just wants to be out with family and stuff. I am curious, how many people stopped him to say hello or try to get an autograph? Can that guy walk through Ball Arena,
Well,
easily? Does he
somebody
have
made that
security
comment.
or his brothers with him? Maybe.
Somebody made that comment on the radio. I heard it was
Yeah.
like, what was it like when he tried to leave? Like, what? Oh, here comes this 7-foot Serbian with his family. Just, I think we all know who he is, but
Yeah.
it's cool that there's mutual respect there between two giants of their sports.
Yeah, yeah. And we're lucky to have him, right?
Yeah,
At
yeah,
the same time, we've talked about that. Having Cale Makar and McKinnon at the same team,
yeah.
on the same team at the same time is just it's an incredible thing that the Avs were able to make happen. And so yeah, we'll see as both teams go on. I think the Avs and Nuggets both have some obstacles ahead, but I know we're in for some fun playoff runs, if nothing else.
All right, make sure to Kyle's story is still up on denvergazette.com, breaking down everything altitude Comcast. And then here you will have coverage of the Avs and Red Wings tonight. Kyle, thanks for coming on, and we will catch up again soon.
Absolutely.